Alrighty, folks, we're back with part 3 of our Onyxia's Lair card reveal. We got a handful of new cards, legendary I teased over on a community post earlier, and lots to break down. So let's kick it off here with Scale of Onyxia, a new Druid spell at 7 mana. This one fills your board with 2/1 whelps with Rush. So this is intriguing. This is actually kind of a different look for Druid. Obviously, it's a big wide token board summoner. That's not different, but it almost serves as a bit of a wide board clear. Like, you know, if you need it to in a pinch, this can actually react to boards pretty well, especially in combination with any wide board buffs that you might have to go with it, trade off into some minions, and then be left behind with some boards. I actually think this is a little better than, say, Infestation for Warlock. It's only 1 mana more, but you get the guaranteed board no matter how many minions are out there. They may not technically trade as well, but you have more control over how to manipulate the trades. You know, if you need to, you can run 3 of these into a 6/6 and still be left with a pretty nice board. So I think there's some interesting utility here. Now, it is pretty high cost for a token style card these days. I think we've seen faster token starts, you know, bigger boards in the early to mid game. 7 mana to get a big board at this stage is pretty late, but you could still see this as maybe like the top end of a token deck that gives you that kind of reactive potential as well. So I do think there's a lot bundled into this card between the reactivity, between the board building, fits things that Druid has liked to do in the past, and maybe could even be played in like, you know, a guff just big mana deck as a way to give you a board answer, some reactivity with that backup plan of a wide board yourself. So I think Scale of Onyxia does a lot of pretty cool things. Moving on here to the Drake Fire Amulet for Mage, a big old 10 mana spell, which that's what we love to see for Big Spell Mage, right? Is this going to be the payoff necessary for Big Spell Mage? It's also tradable, which is pretty nice, because if you need to put it back into your deck for your tower or just because you don't have 10 mana right now, huge upside. I like that a lot. And then when you do get to 10 mana, you can discover 2 dragons and then summon them. So often getting 2 pretty big bodies on board here for 10 mana. And then, you know, if this does get played off of your Iceblood Tower or whatever, on average, you're going to get some big bodies. Now, you're not going to get to pick in that case because it'll be in the end of turn phase, I presume. That's how it would normally work. So, you know, you might low roll into some medium-sized stuff, but of course, if you've only spent 10 mana, you get a couple of these, you get other big spells rolling, there might still be a nice payoff. So is this enough to bring Big Spell Mage to life? I'm still not totally convinced. I still think it's a little iffy. It kind of depends on the quality of dragons in the pool. On average, I think there's going to be a little bit too much of a mix, or you're not going to be able to reliably get big things. If it was 2 Plague Proto-Drakes every time, maybe that's a big enough payoff, but it won't be. In fact, we don't even have Plague Proto-Drakes left that long in standard format. So it's going to take some better dragon pools. There's still some stuff left to be revealed. Maybe like Onyxia comes along and is like insane in this, for instance. We'll see, but ultimately still a very big card, very slow card in an archetype that just doesn't work that well. Big Spell Mage is, you know, kind of teetered close to viability after some balance changes, but hasn't really gotten over the hump. I don't think this is big enough to like push it into viability. So tiny glimmer of hope, but probably just going to be too expensive. Next up here is the Ring of Courage, a 2 mana spell for Paladin. By the way, I love the way these are framed, like showing the artwork behind them is cool. It's a 2 mana tradable spell. Give a minion +1/+1, repeat for each enemy minion. So this is kind of interesting, right? At a base level, not a particularly exciting buff, right? Like 1/1 for 2 is obviously not very efficient, but if your opponent has, you know, 4 things on board, suddenly this is like a 5/5 buff for 2 mana. That's intriguing, especially if you have things like, you know, Blade Master Samuro available. Becomes this just like giga clear for a combo with Blade Master Samuro. Maybe you have a lifesteal minion, you want to get a big heal, just a big taunt you want to stabilize behind. Giving Paladin fuel for buffs like this is cool. I mean, is it better than other buff options? Is it as consistent? Probably not, but it is tradable. And I just like tradable cards have this kind of free bonus where they're much, much easier for mini decks to run. So I do like this as a reactive option to those wider, you know, metas where we have a lot of token stuff. Sometimes those metas definitely pop up. This could be a way to build a big taunt, build a big Samuro. I think that gives this some real possibility. Also, there might be that world where your opponent just goes wide, kind of ignores your minion, and this becomes like a lethal threat, right? Where it's just like, oh, man, you ignored my dude. I'm giving this guy 8/8 twice. you're dead, especially with, like Sidon or something. You can make even bigger dudes. So I would never want to count a card like this one out. It feels like it has some interesting potentials for sure. All right, so next up here is the Horn of Wrathion, a 3-mana priest spell. This one draws you a minion. If it's a dragon, summon 2 2/1 whelps with Rush. So some really interesting stuff here. First up, it's just a minion tutor. So you could theoretically use this outside of a dragon deck if you had some really specific key minion you're looking for. Maybe Kazakusan, for instance. Maybe you want to get Mita, which we'll talk about a little later. Whatever it is, this could help you find it, even if it's not a dragon. 3 mana to tutor something, it's a win condition. Could be worth it, right? In some cases. Probably not usually, though. The more honest use case, of course, is putting this in a deck with a lot of dragons. Maybe it is a Kazakusan priest, or priest with a lot of dragons in it, or only dragons in it. And then you get both minion tutor, which is nice, and some immediate board impact thanks to these whelps. And 2 2/1s with Rush for 3 mana is not bad at all. That's going to help you kind of keep up with your opponent's stuff for a little while. Even in the late game, you play this, you might be able to weave in some buffs with it for priest, just, getting some additional upside there. So, this is a nice little tool. It's going to have specific decks where it matters. It won't be in every deck by any means, I don't think, because right now we have Insight that tutors minions a little more efficiently. If that's your only game plan, that will be rotating soon, so maybe this fills in the gap. But specific card that definitely does something pretty nice for its cost, just limited use case. Next up here is the Tooth of Nefarian, a 3-mana rogue spell. This one's going to deal 3 damage. And honorable kill, discover a spell from another class. So this honorable kill, I think, is a little easier to achieve than normal at 3 damage. There's a lot of 3 health stuff that tends to float around in Hearthstone. Very common health breakpoint, I feel like. So, you could use this in a little bit of a burgle thing. Getting a spell from other classes, certainly nice. Spells are a more limited pool on average. You're going to get something pretty good usually. On top of that, of course, this can just go face. So if you need it as a finisher in a pinch, 3 for 3 is not hyper efficient, but it might be nice if you just need that damage output. So this has that kind of dual flexibility in the early to mid game. Use this as a board clear reactivity tool, keep some resources flowing, find that perfect answer, find more damage maybe. Alternatively, you get in a late game situation that still packs a punch because you can start sending it face to find some end game state. So I think that's cool. Now, I will say this isn't a super efficient cost for Rogue. They tend to like really, really cheap stuff, and 3, weirdly enough, for Rogue isn't really all that cheap. So I do have some fears that this could fall into like a too expensive category for decks that really want to cycle through a lot of things and play things very, very quickly, which is historically when Rogue has been its strongest. So I do think there is some risk there that this just feels like it's in an awkward mana spot, just kind of not fast enough or efficient enough from a damage output per mana cost standpoint. That's the risk for this card, but I do think it does some nice things because of its flexibility. And then here we have the Gear Grubber, a neutral 4 mana 4/5 taunt. And if you end your turn with any unspent mana, reduce this card's cost by 1. So the way I'm reading that does not mean you're reducing it by the amount of unspent mana. I think this is more a conditional discount. So even if you have 3 spare mana at the end of the turn, this is still only going to discount by 1, so you can't cheat it out super quickly. But after a few turns, maybe this becomes, like a 2 mana 4/5 or 3 mana 4/5 with taunt. So that Yeti taunt body. This is a really power crept Yeti, if you will. So, is it going to be good though? I still don't think so. No, I'm not actually very convinced. Yes, of course, there are some decks that have unspent mana in the early game, and this could easily come down on turn 3 or, very affordably by like turn 5 in combination with something else. But I just don't think it's going to be quite enough to do that. Even at 3 mana 4/5, it's like, is this fast enough? I don't know. I think you could play it on 3 pretty reliably. Like if you float a mana on 1, play this on 3. It's not bad, right? It's okay, but most decks want to spend their mana and want to do things and want to have sort of more obvious directed game plans. And this feels more like in that backup plan territory. Like when things are going wrong, this offers me a slight upside. Maybe there will be some decks that very specifically try to manipulate this, but then it's got to be in hand to get it down early to make a difference. I don't think that's going to be reliable. Wild Paw Knoll sort of did this same kind of thing, but like 1,000 times better, right? And that's why it was so strong. I don't think you have the same kind of swing crazy upside potential for Gear Grubber as you would have with Wild Paw Knoll. So, I think it falls notably far short of that option. So let's talk about Meta Pure Light, a new legendary here for Priest. Pretty crazy one. 6 mana, 4/6, Divine Shield, and Lifesteal. With a Death Rattle, shuffle a fragment into your deck that resummons Meta when drawn. We can actually see that fragment right here. It is a holy spell, cast when drawn, summon Meta Pure Light. So essentially, this is a looping card. Like once you get it down and it dies, it's gonna keep coming back, minus any silence, transform style effects. In the line of sort of Wax-o-Dread we had in the past, did a similar thing. But unlike Wax-o-Dread, I think this is a much more relevant minion on board. That was just kind of a stat dump, 7 attack. This, though, has this lifesteal upside, where every time this comes back, you might be able to gain some life out of it and create this kind of sticky, annoying body you could dump buffs on, so on. On top of that, of course, Priest has lots of Death Rattle and resummon synergies as well. So you can imagine worlds where there are like 3 or 4 of these fragments floating around. Priest also has Holy Tutors, where they can actually pull this out of the deck as a holy spell. So that might be a way to more consistently resummon your metas. So the possibilities here start to snowball like crazy. Full boards of metas after some amulets or some Xyrella hero cards seem like possibilities as you move towards the end game. And then, of course, if your opponent clears those, guess what? You're getting another wave at some point if they're not indeed silenced. So that is a pretty, crazy late game proposition. I think the only question here for Meta, because we know that can be nuts, is whether Meta will be better than the Death Rattle package Priest already has access to. Cards like, say, Light Shower Elemental sort of already fulfill this spot. 6 mana, Death Rattle, even has Elemental in case you want to run N'Zoth stuff, which some lists have. Will you be able to take out that Light Shower for a Meta? Because that has Taunt. That has probably more reliable healing because you don't have to stick it and attack like you do with the Lifesteal here on Meta. Maybe one of those comes out. Maybe like an Undying Disciple can get pulled out. But again, that has Taunt. Because you're just kind of plopping this down at that honest 6 mana, that might be too big of a sacrifice to make on that one turn to get this kind of super upside later. I think that Priest is defensive enough and Death Rattle Priest has enough healing and defensive tools that using this as a sort of trump card where you just like, maybe I play all the defensive stuff first, and once I've started around the corner, this comes down and really locks out a game. That feels like a viable option for this. You could maybe argue Questline would do that better for Priest, is giving you a kind of late game win condition. So that's another competitive standpoint. But nonetheless, I think it is just big enough and does enough. And the effect is so monstrous when it starts to gain steam. I think it'll be worth it. Like, I think it's just going to have to make the cut in Death Rattle decks. And certainly Death Rattle Priest is an archetype that hasn't been high tier. It's been low tier up till now. But he gets enough pieces as we move into rotation. I think it's keeping a lot of high value stuff. I wouldn't be shocked at all for Meta to be a key part of a moderately successful Death Rattle Priest deck. Scale of Onyxia is a 4-star card. Drakefire Amulet is a 2-star card. Ring of Courage is a 3-star card. Horn of Wrathion is a 3-star card. Tooth of Nefarian is a 3-star card. Gear Grubber is a 2-star card. Meta is a 4-star card. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this review. I think we have one more review coming at some point tomorrow for the final cards. So stay tuned for that one. Should be some exciting stuff. And then we'll kind of have an idea for what this mini set's going to mean in total, how it's going to potentially shake up and shift the meta. That said, of course, share your thoughts on all these cards in the comments below. Thanks much for watching. And until next time, game on.